Another major Republican political debate last night. What are the top 3 lessons, communications lessons, that business people can learn from that debate? In today's show, we're going to cover business lessons from the debate last night, communication lessons from the candidates that people can use in any business situation. That's the first segment. The second segment, I'll be giving a detailed assessment of every single presidential candidate last night in the debates. And finally, we'll be looking at how Donald Trump has completely upended the traditional world of political advertising. But first, the lessons from the debate last night. Ted Cruz had a moment that, on the one hand, was a mistake. On the other hand, was absolutely brilliant, and it's a lesson anyone in business should really take to heart. Ted Cruz said, I am going to eliminate 5 government agencies. Now, this had some of us who follow debates closely on the edge of our seat, because this is essentially exactly what destroyed his fellow Texan, Rick Perry's candidacy 4 years ago, when he said, I'm going to eliminate 3 agencies, and he couldn't remember the third. He said, oops, then he looked like an absolute fool, and his campaign never recovered. Well, Ted Cruz, after naming the 3rd agency last night, paused, eyes looked up. You could tell he forgot what to say next. We're on the edge of our seats, but he recovered nicely. Now, he actually made a mistake. He said he was going to name 5 agencies. He only named 4, and he repeated the Department of Commerce. But here's what he did well. He didn't apologize. He didn't say, oops. He didn't say, now what was that 5th? No, he didn't call attention to his mistake. In fact, most people, and I confess, I noticed he made a little stumble, but I didn't notice at the time that he even repeated himself. So the real lesson here is, if you make a mistake, don't call attention to yourself. Act like you can't believe how well this answer is going. And that's what Ted Cruz did. Sure, there are a couple of little fact checkers the day after saying, gotcha, criticize it, but there was no soundbite to pull. There's no video of him to put on all the newscasts saying, hey, remember the last Texan who did this? Here's another Texan who is inarticulate. Cruz did not give the media or his opponents any ammunition. So again, there's really 2 lessons here. Number 1, you make a mistake, don't call attention to it. Don't stop, don't say oops. Just keep on going the best you can. Act like you can't believe what a good job you're doing. And Ted Cruz did that magnificently. But the second big lesson is, don't put all this pressure on yourself by saying, I'm going to name 5 things or 3 things. Just say what you want to say, and if you forget 1 or 2 of them, then don't tell anyone. No one else will know. So that's the big lesson. My hat's off to Ted Cruz for an excellent recovery there. Now, the next lesson I think business people need to learn from the debate last night is the art of interrupting. If you interrupt all the time, you come across as rude, obnoxious, people hate you. In fact, focus groups showed that Governor Kasich came across as interrupting too much. People really did not like him. But if you never interrupt, you run the risk of not getting any airtime, nobody hearing from you, and people saying you're meek, ineffective, a non-entity. Now, your typical business meeting, a board of directors meeting, a new pitch meeting, a Monday morning staff meeting is not as contentious as a televised political debate. There's no doubt about that. But still, you have to listen carefully. You have to make judgments. Have I said enough? Am I being overshadowed here? There are times when you have to hop in. The key is you don't do it too much. You pick the right time. You try to do it with a smile on your face. You don't whine and complain the way some of the politicians, hey, I didn't have my turn. You don't whine or complain. You just hop in a little bit louder and speak a little bit faster and forcefully, and perhaps repeat your first sentence. And if you do that every once in a while, you'll be seen as forceful. Again, I'm not suggesting you do this in every business meeting, every forum, every panel discussion. But if you always simply wait your turn, there is the danger you seem like a non-entity. So I do believe that business communicators can learn a thing or two from how these candidates choose to interrupt themselves when it is a tightly compressed time situation with a lot of people trying to speak. The final thing I think business people can learn from this episode is how sexism does appear, and it can be unconscious to those demonstrating it. By all accounts, all the candidates last night were interrupting each other. By some counts, John Kasich interrupting more than anyone. And yet Donald Trump went out of his way to say, why does this woman keep interrupting us? Specifically talking about Carly Fiorina. Now, folks, it takes a lot to get booed from a Republican debate audience, but Donald Trump did, in fact, get booed for that. And it just struck a lot of people as just overtly sexist. Why is it that her voice interrupting is so much more obnoxious or toxic to Donald Trump than all the other men? Now, that may not hurt Donald Trump in the Republican primary. In fact, it might even help him. But in most business situations, it's hard for me to imagine how being perceived as a sexist and how saying a woman interrupting the same or less than men is offensive. It's hard for me to imagine how that can't hurt someone. So be very careful before you start chastising one person. You got to ask yourself, is it something about their voice that's bothering more than other voices because it's different from mine? Something to reflect upon. So that's what I believe are the three top lessons from the debate last night that are really applicable to communicators in all business situations, and in fact in all organizations. Now, let's get down to an assessment of the campaign debate last night. I don't think it is one of the debates that was a truly defining moment of the campaign. I don't think anyone's fortunes were entirely made or lost. There were a lot of, I would say, average and slightly above average performances. Let's start with the senators. Rand Paul, I do think, had a better night than usual. He made a very, very compelling case for why his brand of libertarian conservatism is legitimate. Asking Rubio, can you really call yourself a conservative and just blindly go after billions and billions of more government programs, even if it has to be defense? Now, Rubio had a good response to that. But Rand Paul had, I think, his best debate so far. Is that enough for him to get above 5% and to be perceived as a mere sort of token libertarian, stand in for his father? That I'm not sure about, but it certainly was better than his other performances. Senator Ted Cruz we talked earlier about his one mistake, but how he recovered beautifully. He had many, many strong, forceful moments. There are many who do believe that once the non-political establishment candidates fade, that Ted Cruz will be there to lock up the establishment, will be seen as a viable candidate. Ted Cruz is clearly smart, articulate, and is technically a great speaker. He does have a style, I believe, that you either love or you hate. And Ted Cruz is, by most nonpartisan accounts, one of the most hated men in Washington, especially by Republicans in the Senate. That may make him a better presidential candidate, but you have to look at that when factoring in how people view him as a speaker and as a communicator. But I think overall it was a fine night for Ted Cruz. He continued to show that he can reach out to various conservative factions within the party, come across as credible, as passionate, as conservative, and yet as someone who knows about how the real world works and is electable. So I think he and his supporters had to be fairly happy too. Marco Rubio had another good night. For people who aren't Republican conservative voters and party voters, but who are mainstream media analysts, mainstream commentators, communications analysts, Rubio is far and away the best communicator of the lot. And I'm really no different there. I do think that Rubio comes across more likable, more forceful, more confident, more relaxed, more believable than the other candidates. So increasingly, he is being considered the alternative to Trump and to Ben Carson. And a lot of the party insiders are saying, we got to get rid of Jeb Bush and coalesce around Rubio. I think his fans, his supporters who are pushing that narrative, have to be pleased with how the night went. Let's switch now to the governors. Governor Kasich. When this campaign started, he was called the new John Huntsman. John Huntsman was the moderate Republican governor who ran last time, got absolutely nowhere, but got a lot of media attention, essentially criticizing the conservative base of the party. Kasich continues to essentially criticize conservatives, criticize conservative positions as not based in reality. And while that can score you some points in the mainstream media, it's hard to see how that gains him any traction whatsoever in the Republican Party. At one point, John Kasich was looking like a viable alternative to Trump and Carson if and when they implode. That's looking less and less likely. I don't think Kasich helped himself at all. He came across as too abrasive, peevish, annoyed, and as if everyone else up there were stupid. Now, you can make the case that he had some legitimacy in making those arguments, but it doesn't win you votes. It doesn't make you more likable. Next up, Jeb Bush. I have to say this was the best performance I've seen Jeb Bush have in any political debate. He had more energy. He seemed more upbeat. He seemed more positive. He seemed a little happier to be there. But that's grading Jeb Bush on a curve. He still paled in comparison to Marco Rubio and some of the other candidates last night. I think he did enough to sort of slow down the stream of articles saying he should quit, he should get out, people are abandoning him, but I don't think it stops that narrative. I don't see that he did anything that made grassroots conservative supporters sit up and say, wow, I never thought of Bush like that. Well, let me take a second look. He didn't do that. And that's part of what he needed. He still seems a little peevish, a little annoyed, a little exasperated at being there. And that just is not winning in a presidential candidate. Now let's talk about the outsiders. Carly Fiorina had certainly good moments. She is articulate, she's forceful. When she is attacking Hillary, she comes across with strong emotion, and you can tell the Republican conservative base eats it up. The problem she has is, we've seen this before, she's done extremely well in other debates, and then you basically never hear from her again until the next debate. There doesn't seem to be any organization there, any strategy, but certainly a lot of voters who see her and see her strong, forceful attacks on Hillary like that. The question is that enough when everyone else is attacking Hillary too? I don't know that she did enough that we're going to see any measurement up in the polls for her. Didn't hurt herself, didn't do anything to hurt her campaign. Certainly no mistakes or blunders. Next up, Ben Carson. Ben Carson did in fact improve a great deal. For the first time, he did not seem like he was asleep on stage. So by Ben Carson's standards, his energy level doubled or tripled. He seemed much more forceful, much more confident. Now in the past, his numbers have gone up after debates, not seemingly because of anything he did at the debates. People liked his personal narrative, personal story, his backstory, and that story has been called into question a great deal in the last couple of weeks. So too soon to tell how voters are going to filter that out. Are they going to look at the debate and say, wow, I really like his force? Or are they going to say, all this stuff about his background, did he stab someone, didn't he? Did he get a scholarship offer to West Point or not? Is that going to chip away at their perception of him as being completely truthful and honest? Now, Ben Carson has done a great job of attacking the media, which is typically a very good strategy when you are a Republican running in a primary. Overall, I thought it was a good night for Ben Carson on the basic standards of communication, debate skills. It was far and away his best debate, no question about it. That leaves us with Trump. Trump did not particularly shine last night. He didn't have any golden moments, but he was still sort of his Trumpy usual best of attacking people, saying he's great. I noticed, I forgot who it was, but he called somebody a dummy last night. And there's just something about that that resonates with 25% of the Republican Party. They'll love it when somebody is calling other political people dummies. And while he may have been booed by some in the audience for chastising Carly Fiorina, I have no doubt that 25% of the voters who saw that might say, yeah, tell that woman to shut her mouth. So I don't think Trump actually hurt himself. Are we going to see a big bump for Trump after this? No, but he doesn't need a bump. He's number one in the polls again, and he's number one in New Hampshire and nationwide. He did not do anything to seriously harm his campaign. He certainly didn't say anything that mainstream commentators said, oh my gosh, that's a horrible gaffe, the way he did in previous debates, and it turned out none of those things actually hurt him. Overall assessment in this debate, there were no clear-cut winners and losers as far as we're going to see somebody jump up 10 points in the polls in the next 5 days. Overall, a number of solid performances, no huge blunders. And part of this is, this is what, the fourth or fifth debate now. They're getting better at it. And voters now have so many different debates to choose from in their memories, it does get harder for any one debate to have a defining moment. And by the way, for all the debates, I will be doing live tweets. So if you go to Twitter @TJWalker, you can see my comments and thoughts, and I'd be happy to hear from you, and we can have a conversation the night of debates too. Now, for our last topic today, a lot of attention going to Donald Trump and the fact that he's not spending any money on advertising. Now, this is really unprecedented to have a primary season where lots of candidates are spending $10, $20 million on advertising in certain key states, and the front runner is spending nothing. Trump has proven to be a master at social media, earned media, and publicity. And some are wondering, does this really change politics forever? I think it does. I'm not saying that we're never going to see the traditional 30-second TV ads. But I do think it is increasingly difficult to reach voters and undecided voters using ads. I look at someone old like me. I'm 52, so I'm not the profile of converting a new coveted millennial, but I am the profile of someone who's likely to vote. Someone can't really reach me through buying traditional TV ads on the local news because I don't watch local news. When I'm watching television, I'm watching videos from Netflix, I'm watching it from YouTube, and if there is an ad on YouTube, I can't remember ever seeing a political ad on YouTube, with one click it's gone. And you look at millennials, people who are just now of voting age and in their 20s and early 30s, they're not really watching much TV. They're playing video games. They're watching YouTube. When I look at some of my nieces and nephews and what they're watching, I couldn't pay them to watch a local news broadcast and have them sit in front of political ads. So Trump is clearly on to something. What Trump does realize is if you constantly say interesting things and controversial things, you will get a tremendous number of eyeballs, even if you're not always great at it. We saw that with his performance on Saturday Night Live last week. By all accounts, Trump wasn't particularly funny. He's certainly not a comedian. He's not even the best non-comedian to perform on Saturday Night Live, but he had the highest ratings in years and years and years on Saturday Night Live. He attracts eyeballs, and because of that, he doesn't have to pay money for advertising. And when you look at some of the largest brands in the world these days, whether it's Uber, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn. For the most part, I understand Uber spends a little money on advertising, but for the most part, they're not gaining worldwide dominance because of advertising. They're gaining dominance because they're able to communicate directly with people through social media. So I think Trump may be onto something with how he campaigns and how that's going to affect future campaigns. It's going to put a premium on candidates who have interesting things to say. Thanks for joining me today. We are doing a little bit of a different format where I'm doing longer shows. These are soon going to be available as video podcast and audio podcast on iTunes. If you have any questions, topics you'd like me to address, please post it here, either on my blog, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're experiencing this. And if you would like a free online training course on how to be a better speaker or how to speak to the media, go to MediaTrainingWorldwide.com, click the link below. It'll take you there, and you can get my online training course at absolutely no charge. So please do that today.